안녕하세요, Cloud입니다. Hey guys, Cloud here. Today I wanted to kind of share how it is I go about planning progression for a language with a student. So right now I'm going to treat you as if you're one of my students that I've been teaching one-on-one, obviously in a classroom. Classroom, it's a little bit different. You make lessons plans and curriculums and whatnot. For self-study, like one-on-one or things like that, I do it a little bit differently. So today we're going to look at that, and I'll actually just take you step by step of like what's my mentality when I'm learning a language or when I'm teaching somebody a language, and what things do I do to kind of get them get the most benefit out of our time together, and at the same time get the most benefit outside of our time together, because you don't want all the language learning to happen when it's just one-on-one. You would like for that to be spaced across, every day a little bit, depending on their preferences and whatnot. So I want to just show you how that would work. So let me do that here. Let's bring this up and let's make this bigger and zoom in a little bit. I think you should be able to see this. Perfect. All right. So the first thing we'll do is we have to figure out what you want to learn. So since this kind of channel is predominantly, Korean based, we'll do Korean. That is not how you Korean. All right. The second thing is, what is your goal with the language? So, and I mean it in two different ways. Firstly, how long do you want to spend learning this language until you get a level of fluency that you can, have regular conversation with people? And that varies from time and place. So some people might say, hey, I'm moving to Korea next year. What do I do? So they have like 1 year or 2 year or 3 years. Some people don't really have a timeline. I just want to learn the language. I don't really care when it happens. I just want to do it at some point. So you can just put plus. In this video, since I think most people don't really have a deadline, at least from my experience, most people are like either have multiple years, so they have already decided that once they graduate from high school, they want to go to Korea for university, and that's like 3 to 4 years, in the future. So I would say 3+. So that's kind of the approach that I'm going to take. You have 3+ years to kind of spend just learning the language. The goals, if you're moving to Korea, you probably want to be able to speak and study the language. If you're going to study in a university, you probably want to be able to have that sort of, understanding the lectures and whatnot. It's a different kind of ear or different muscles that you need to practice or develop than just, hey, I just want to be, able to speak it with my friends or my colleagues or whatever. Or maybe you don't want to move to Korea. You just want to learn the language so you can communicate with your Korean neighbors, or watch K-dramas without subs, be able to read, the webtoons, since they come out earlier if you read the Korean version. Whatever your goal is, obviously I can't ask you that. Although it would be cool if this was live and we could actually have someone do that. But that's not the case now. But I think I might be willing to do that. Regardless. Back to what we were talking about. We're going to go with the 3+ years. So we're just going to say we have a lot of time on our hands. Next, I would ask why Korean? So I would find out why you're learning Korean. If K-dramas, K-pop, webtoons, if that's kind of your thing, I would go down one way. If just you like the sound of the language, or maybe you're more into the linguistics, you can see how this can be tailored specifically to the person. And that's why usually this is what you do one-on-one in a classroom. You try to find why you want to learn the language. Usually it's kind of obvious, but you can't really do this kind of stuff. Of course, you can, after class, you can sit down with me and we can talk about things you can do outside of class, but usually I try to cover that during class of things that you can do depending on what you like. So we find out why you want to learn Korean. For this case, we're just going to say you really enjoy K-dramas, want to watch them without subs, want to watch without subs, possibly moving to Korea. Possibly move to Korea. So that's kind of why you're learning Korean. The next thing I would do is I would ask, do you consume? So, sorry, my spelling is really bad. Do you consume any Korean content that you enjoy? So this is a really important question. Why? Because this is your exposure to the language. And this is very important because the more exposure you get, the easier it's going to be for you to learn. It's very hard to learn a language without being exposed to it. It just makes sense. Imagine a child, and he's predominantly exposed to, for example, Spanish, but he's exposed to a little bit of English. Which language do you think he's going to learn? He's going to learn Spanish, not so much English. It's the same thing. If you just expose yourself to enough of the Korean language, it'll make it easier. Now, obviously, you're not a child. People aren't going to treat you like a child. They're not going to teach you Korean. You're not surrounded by a Korean environment. It's a little bit different, but you get the concept of having sort of exposure. So I guess you could call this exposure. So exposure. All right. Now we have to make up answers because I'm not actually asking someone. Let's see. Let's say you enjoy variety shows, Korean variety shows, and you stan a couple groups, K-pop groups, right? So you watch their interviews, I don't know, their V-Lives or whatever they're called. I'm not too familiar with that stuff. But you basically, let's just say 1 to 2 hours a day. Of Korean content. So obviously a lot of people aren't going to have this. I'm just giving this as an example. Hopefully you can kind of see how I'm thinking about this, like in a step-by-step progression, and you can apply this to yourself. So if you're exposed to 1 to 2 hours a day of Korean content, that's a great start. That's phenomenal. I wish I had something like that for every single language. The next thing we would say is we try to find out what kind of content that is, but we kind of already said it here. It's probably variety shows and maybe some K-pop group interviews and whatnot, some content that they make. I'm sure they have like YouTube channels and they make like interviews or stuff like that, vlogs and whatnot. So now, one of the most important things that I think for the first 3 to 6 months, really, of your language learning. So this is all this stuff is like kind of about you, right? So this is, let's just go all the way up here and write about you. Here, we're going to start with your prescription or your curriculum, I guess. And this is where it gets a little bit iffy because this really depends on the person. Some people like to open a book and study from a book. Some people hate that. Some people don't want to do that. It really depends on the person. Everybody is going to have their own learning style. And that's where the one-on-one kind of interaction comes, where I can see what things you enjoy. Like, hey, this is how I study. I can ask you that. And you tell me, this is how I usually study. I had someone that I did this for. They would do, they were studying in not med school, but pre-med. And they told me like the way they learn the, AMP1 and 2 and things like that. And that's how they went through it. And I can say, is this useful? Like, would you care to do this for learning Korean? They wanted to do a little bit quicker than 3+ years. And so we use that same strategy because it works for them and they don't really mind using it. For me, I'd never be able to study the way she was studying. I even in university, I wouldn't study like that. So regardless, I would say 3 to 6 months. So what you do is you take 10 minutes of whatever you're watching, and you turn off. Oh, whoops. One sec, let's fix this. There we go. And you turn off you turn off the subs. If you don't have a means of turning off the subs, like sometimes I know in I'm not sure where, but I know sometimes you can't remove the subtitles. There's a method that you can just, I brought these here. You can rip up a piece of paper and you can put it on your monitor or your laptop or whatever to cover. I know that's a couple friends who do that. I know Netflix, you can kind of just turn off the subtitles. But I know sometimes the subtitles are embedded into the video, so you can't. So just have a piece of paper. You probably need a couple of them because they're usually very thin. Oh, I don't know if it showed, but they're usually very thin. So you might want to like get a couple of them and kind of just put them there. You can tape it to the sides if you really want to. If you have a monitor, usually there's like a thick border that you can just put them in that little tiny gap. But regardless, just cover them up. So yeah, take 10 minutes of whatever you're watching, turn off the subs. Now, there's two ways to do this. You can, one, watch those 10 minutes with the subs, then immediately after without the subs, or two, which is what I do, just turn off subs during those 10 minutes so you don't actually watch it twice. Now, watching it twice is probably better. One, because you actually understand what's going on. Two, because you might pick up words that way. Since your brain has it fresh, it's fresh in your brain that you know that that's what that means. You know that they're going to say that already. So when you hear the Korean word, you can almost, one for one, put it together. Watching it without subs one time does the same thing because context is so key. You see the people, you see they're walking, they're doing these actions, these facial expressions, they're in shock and they say something. It probably doesn't mean happy birthday. If there's all singing around at a birthday around a cake, you probably know what they're singing. Things like that are kind of tell you what you want to do. So you want to kind of tap into your knowledge of, just human interaction and your native language. You already know the type of things people are going to say. And the other benefit of this, and I think I have a video on this, although I don't think I uploaded it. Never mind. But basically, it was a tweet. And I tweeted out a video of it's called a selective focus test. And what happens is they tell you to focus on something. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but you can look it up on the just YouTube and just do a selective focus test. And because you're so focused on one thing, you completely miss something else. And it's the same thing with subtitles. You might focus on reading the subtitles, but you won't actually hear what they said. And if I ask you to repeat what they just said, you wouldn't be able to. Like, not even close. But on the other hand, if you did not, if you had the subtitles turned off, you may have been able to kind of regurgitate some of the sounds, even if you don't know the words. What happens here is that you're focused more on the context and you're actually allowing yourself to hear versus you're so focused on reading that you don't actually hear what they're saying. So this is going to be, a common theme where subtitles might actually hurt you because you're not actually listening to the language. You might think that you're listening and you're learning, but you're only learning a few words like 감사합니다 or 고맙습니다, things like that. You're not really sentences. You're not really paying attention to the sentences. You're not hearing anything from the sentences unless it's just like one word, 가자. Like these small phrases you'll pick up. But once they start speaking in sentences, you're not going to do that. You're not going to be able to. The second thing that this does is it helps once we start with actually learning. So this is all like passive learning, I would call it. Once we do some more active learning where you actually, basically it's called focus study, and you hold a textbook or something and you learn from a textbook, or you do some vocab practices or whatever, do some reading. What ends up happening is you're going to learn these words. And then you're going to go and you're going to watch something. And that word is going to pop up and you're not going to hear it. Why? Because you're focused on the subtitles. And then you're going to see, oh, look, I know what that is. And then if you rewind it and you play it again, you'll hear it this time. You'll hear the word. So we don't want that to kind of happen. What we want is for you to start, as soon as you start learning some things, you can immediately recognize it in the stuff that you're watching. And that'll help you develop a sense of, fluency in that sort of material that you've learned. So let's say you've learned, 9 lessons. You hearing those 9 lessons in the content that you're watching will help you a lot. But if you just use the subtitles, it's not going to help you as much because you're not building that fluency. You're not getting used to it. You're more focused on reading the subtitles. And again, this goes back to the selective attention test. So this is, I would say, 3 to 6 months. I did this for about 6 months for my Japanese. And I'd say I I watched anime like when I was younger. Obviously, I stopped. I read manga, but I went back to anime about 6 months ago, 7 months ago actually now, because it's the end of January, and I've just been 10 minutes a day, almost every day. I've missed a few days, obviously, but yeah, 10 minutes a day. Just watch. I would watch the first 10 minutes of the episode, and then the second 10 minutes, I would turn off the subtitles, and just watch the rest of the anime. And I don't feel like I've missed anything. Obviously, you can say, hey, Korean made it a little bit easier for you, but still, I have my friend does that. My friend been watching anime for a long time, and I'd say his Japanese comprehension is better than mine. He knows more, more words. So one thing that I noticed is that he actually can't pick up on words, because I started doing this before him. When he's listening, he doesn't actually, pick up the words, and then I'll say the word, and then he'd be like, oh, I know what that word means, but I'm like, they just said it in the sentence. And he's like, oh, I didn't hear it. I couldn't catch that. And then after a while, he started to be able to actually do that. So there's a lot of benefits to this. It's enjoyable. If you make it into like a challenge of just trying to understand. Another thing I would do is I would repeat whatever they were saying. I don't always do this. If I'm like engrossed into the what I'm watching, I'm not really gonna be repeating. But sometimes I'll just repeat because it's fun. Try to get my tongue rolling. So I would say 3 to 6 months. The longer, the better. Now, I don't stop doing this. I didn't stop doing this. I'm still doing this as I'm learning other stuff, just because I don't have any other sort of content. I don't have any other exposure other than anime. And that's okay for me. I'm not really taking this approach that I'm showing you right now because it doesn't work for me. Again, it's very similar. It's just different. I definitely didn't watch stuff when I was doing Korean. I read because that's for me. If you like webtoons, man, there's so many webtoons, so many good webtoons that you can read. And that's kind of where I got my exposure. I didn't listen to anything or watch anything. I wish I could. I wish I had like Korean anime that I really enjoyed. I would do that, but I didn't find something that I could like. So 3 to 6 months, just focus on that. Don't really focus on learning the language yet. The last thing that this does is that it places the knowledge of the grammar in your head. And what I mean by that is that you've heard certain words be conjugated in a certain way all the time. Or you've heard a certain sentence structure all the time. So now when you study it, you're like, oh, I remember. I've heard it like a bajillion times. That's what that means. So there's that. It really kind of sets up. It's like you have a really good base and you're already comfortable with the base. And now you're kind of just unlocking some hidden meanings to the base. So after 6 months, you would say, for Korean, I'd say definitely, even before this, you can probably do it. You can do it like in the very beginning. You can learn Hangul. It's very easy to learn. It doesn't take that much time. Maximum 2 weeks, I think you should be able to done, depending on how much time you spend on it. But it's a very, very easy alphabet to learn, and it'll really, really help you a lot just learning. You can learn it in like a day if you want. But yeah, this is going to be definitely beneficial. After this, now, I would say, what kind of learning materials do you like? Physical books. How do you spell physical? Physical books. Maybe you like, you want an audio series, just like audio series. Maybe you want a video series, etc. I guess that's pretty much it. It's either physical book, online books. There's a lot of resources. I have a video about that. I'm sure if you look anywhere, you'll find a bunch of different places. I will mention a few. So for physical books, you have Korean Made Simple. I think this is the one by Go Billy Korean. You have, I don't know if I would recommend Sogang's book for self-study. Korean Made Simple. I'm kind of blanking out on books right now, but I'm sure quick Google search, you'll find books that kind of, talk to you. There's also How to Study Korean. This is free, so you don't have to like pay for anything. It's a website that goes through a lot of detail. So if you like more into the rigorous kind of side of the language and you really want to know like a lot of details about stuff. How to study Korean. So how to study Korean.com. Now this isn't physical. You can print it out if you want, but it's just a website. There's, I think, 160 lessons at this point. They go through the very basics up to more advanced concepts, and there's recaps of a lot of the lessons that I make. So plug to that on the YouTube channel of How to Study Korean. So there's that. Check that out. Again, it might be a little bit too rigorous, but at least it provides kind of a curriculum for you for free that you can check. This isn't the only curriculum that you need to know, but it also provides like vocab. So it gives you vocab and grammar, and it uses that vocab in the example sentences. So as long as you follow their vocab and grammar, all the sentences will make sense to you. They won't use words that you don't know. And the recaps, sometimes I tend to use words that you don't know, and I apologize for that, but I try to stick to the words that have already previously been learned. So there's How to Study Korean. For audio, there's Talk to Me in Korean. So TTMIC, I'll just write it out. Talk to Me in Korean. .com has I think it's a 9 series. What is it called? Basically a grammar podcast. Is it Iyagi? No, it's not called Iyagi. But yeah, there's 9 levels, and they go through grammar. They give you some explanations. They give you some examples, and then they have reviews and whatnot, so you can listen to that. For video series, there's a bunch of video series for beginners. I know Go Billy. So I think he's Learn Korean with Go Billy on YouTube. I think that's what it's called. You can find, he has a playlist of about 100 episodes. I don't know if all of them are out. Episodes of basic grammar for beginners. So this will kind of help you for beginners. I know Korean Onni. I don't know how she spells Onni. EU? No, maybe just Onni. Her YouTube channel has a playlist for beginners. It's also a grammar playlist. Who else? I think Minji Teaches Korean has one too. I might be wrong. Minji Teaches Korean. Miss Vicky does a bunch of beginner related playlists. I think she has a playlist, if I'm not mistaken. There's just so many, honestly, for the YouTube channels. If you just go to Reddit, the language, the Korean, I think it's R Korean, and you go to their resources or their what are they called, FAQ or resources, you will find an abundance of resources for just YouTube channels, books, podcasts, TV shows, etc., etc., etc. So you don't really have to worry about like the material. I would say just go through him. Think to yourself, what do you prefer? Oh, maybe I want some videos. Check the first one. You like it, you like it. You don't move on to the next one. You like one, just stick with it. I think they're all good. They all make sense. None of them are like blatantly wrong or anything. It just, whatever speaks to you, do it. There's no like one right answer. They're all right. I think it's spelled this way. I don't know. I'll just keep it this way. But yeah, there's no like one resource that's the best. It's kind of what you enjoy or what you prefer. So yeah, we would figure out kind of what you want to spend. Now for grammar. So this is all for grammar basically. Although some of them have vocab, obviously. For grammar, do like one lesson a week. Don't do more than this, to be honest. Even if you want to do one lesson every 2 weeks and just like practice that lesson, review that lesson, get familiar with that lesson, really, be comfortable with that lesson. That's going to help you a lot more than just doing every single day a grammar lesson, because you need time to get exposed to that lesson, to the sort of grammar and really understand it. Because guess what? The first thing you're going to learn is, let me make sure I have the right keyboard. None. That's the first thing you're going to learn. And you're going to go on Reddit and you're going to ask, I still don't understand what this does. Or you're going to ask, what's the difference between none and ka? Because you're not going to understand it from the beginning. Neither did I. I don't think there's ever been a language learner. Maybe if they're Japanese, maybe then it would be easier. But in general, this is going to be confusing. And it's very basic. as in like in order of things that you need to learn. So I would spend a lot of time in the beginning lessons, especially because you're still doing this. You're still listening to. You're still getting your ear used to the language, the sounds of the language. You're also kind of now you're slowly seeing the words and grammars that you've learned, and you're kind of, oh, that's why there's a nun there, or oh, that hakseng, I know what that means. Things like that. Honestly, that's one of the most enjoyable parts for me in Japanese. Once I started anime again, not only did I have sort of some of the words that I remember from when I was younger watching anime, but also from Japanese. There's a lot of like overlapping words and kind of the grammar structure. So it was definitely enjoyable. Like, oh, I know that word. Especially more complicated words. It just feels nice to be able to know them because of Korean. So this is what I would do. I wouldn't spend too much time. Vocab, this is, everybody. So I'll tell you what the most effective way is, and I'll tell you what the most efficient way is. And again, those are different for people, but I think it's objective to say that the most efficient way is spaced repetition. So I think that's how it's SRS. Basically things like Anki or memorize. These will Quizlet, etc. You probably know what I'm talking about. Flashcards, basically repeating them. Spaced repetition will be the most efficient way of learning vocab. I don't think it's the most effective way. Why? Because to me it's boring. Maybe you enjoy it. Maybe you have a 30-minute bus ride and you're bored during that bus ride, and this is a great time for you to do this. Be my guest. I did this for a little bit in the beginning. I didn't enjoy it. When I say a little bit, I mean like probably a few months. For me, personally, I prefer learning through context. So I would read a webtoon. And every now and then I'd see a word all the time. Like, for example, one word that I would see, kaunde, and I would be like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And eventually I kind of got a feel for it, and then I looked it up or I asked someone, and then they were like, oh yeah, that's kind of the feel that I had for it. This is slower, a lot slower. One thing that you can do is you can take a couple of words in context that seem kind of simple and you can learn them. Also, if you're watching something and you hear like somebody say busopta or buso, and you can kind of tell from context that they're scared, you can kind of make those correlations. You can write it down, and then you can just have a log of words that you have written down. You don't even need to like review them all the time. Maybe once a week, just kind of read through them and then be like, oh yeah, because now you have something related to it. So you have context for that word. So every time you hear busopta, you're going to remember maybe, I don't know, some actor being like really scared. And you're going to have that sort of mental visual. I have a lot of words that in my mind, as soon as I see them, I remember exactly where I saw them. Maybe like not exactly 100%, but I remember the context and where it was and everything about it. So I can recall it. Now, again, this takes a lot more time, and it's not as efficient, but for me, it's effective because it's much more fun learning through context, learning through something I enjoy doing. One other way is to do mnemonics. Mnemonics. I think that's how it's spelled. I did this as well in the beginning. I found this more fun than doing things like Anki and memorize. You would take a word. I always give this example of chamguda, which means to lock, and I would make a story of it. So I tried to open my locker, but it was jammed. And I kept trying open, and finally it opened, and it was full of goo, and that's why it was jammed. Jam and goo, right? chamguda, all verbs end in, and adjectives end in ta, so I usually just make stories without ta. So chamguda means to be locked, to be locked. If you still don't get kind of what I'm saying, I have a few videos on this sort of topic. I think they're called like Korean vocab series or something. Where I just basically have a picture, and the picture relates to the word that you're going to learn. So it might be a picture of a cow, and I'm using that sort of word cow to remember a different Korean word, and there's sort of a story that goes along. I know there's one about spaceships and pressing buttons. I haven't made them in a while. I made them a while ago is what I'm trying to say, so I don't remember the stories. But there's quite a few things that you can do with that. So whatever works for you, do that for your vocab. for Korean, grammar is a little more important than vocab because a lot of the vocab is through grammar. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you want to ask a question or you want to express I want, and there's a grammar form for I want. It's not really a word, although there is a word, but that's a different context, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't really matter. Just I would spend maybe a little more time on grammar in the beginning just to get the basic words down. Again, if you're doing this sort of Anki memorize Quizlet sort of approach, I wouldn't put a word limit. Like, I'm going to do 50 words because sometimes you might encounter really easy words and it takes you 10 minutes. Sometimes you might find really hard words and you just can't remember them. And you spend hours and hours and hours and you get demotivated. I would say maybe 10, 15 minutes a day, if that, honestly. Maybe 5 times 5 per week on doing grammar. Again, this is something that I would talk with my student and figure out what exactly, what exactly is okay for them, what would they be willing to do, what do they want to do. Some of them are much more ambitious and they want to do a lot more, and they want to, instead of 10 minutes, they're doing 60 minutes of no subs, although I wouldn't recommend watching the full thing without subtitles. You want a little bit of subtitles to kind of, at least give you some context so you're not missing out on a lot of things. But some people want to go hard, and that's okay. I wouldn't recommend going hard because, to be honest, it can lead to burnout, and you don't want to be burnt out, especially if this is your first language. I would recommend even if you want to half everything I said, you want to do 5 minutes here, you want to do like half a lesson a week, or like one lesson every 2 weeks. You want to do 5 minutes, and 2 times a week. Do less, but more consistently. It's better than doing a lot less consistently. So that's pretty much it for an absolute beginner. This is where we would leave off, and we'd say, okay, after they do 3 to 6 months, we start doing a little bit of this, and then we do this for about 2 to 3 months. All right, so this is in total, if you say 6 months and 3 months, that's 9 months, right? So like, let's say 9 months later, 20 years later, 9 months later, total, right? We reevaluate. All right, where are you on your grammar? Where are you in your vocab? Where are you in your speaking? Where are you in reading? What I didn't say is, I guess I should kind of had, somewhere along the way we're gonna get some reading. I hesitate to kind of mention things for you to read, because for me it would be webtoons. For you, you might enjoy like reading Harry Potter in Korean, and that's cool if that's what you want to do. I could never do that. So this is something where we would try to get a little bit of reading done in and out, and to qualify, reading out loud, because this is going to help your pronunciation. We're also going to try to find you a language exchange partner. I want you to start speaking what little bit of Korean that you know. Now, this can be done here. This can be done after the 9 months. It's completely up to you whenever you're comfortable with it. Maybe you're not comfortable. I learned more Korean from language exchange than I did from studying. I will tell you that much. It's a very powerful tool if you know how to use it. We would talk more about how to use it. Maybe I can even make a video on sort of how I used to prep my language exchanges. Yes, I used to prep for them. And how I tried to get the most bang out of my buck. But yeah, after 9 months, we'd reevaluate. Maybe we didn't start reading. Maybe now we can start the reading. Maybe we want to do writing. Maybe you really enjoy writing. Maybe there are artists that you really enjoy and you want to learn more about like the artistic, world of Korean. I'm not too sure. I'm just throwing things out. We would try to find what your hobbies are and try to incorporate Korean into your hobbies. That's one thing I'm doing nowadays. I watch chess in English, and I watch it in Korean because I enjoy it. And it's not boring at all for me. Versus if you were to tell me to watch a K-drama, I'd probably, stop 3 minutes in, which I've tried. I think there was a lot of hype around something called Startup. I think it was called Startup. I watched 5 minutes. I was like, nope, can't do it. You give me a chess video, I'll watch the whole thing. So basically, from here on out, it really depends on what your hobbies are. I'm not going to tell you to just follow this sort of structured way, because I think you make the structure, because it's you who's learning it. But this is kind of the first 3 to 6 months, first 9 months, you can kind of have a template that can be played around with. I tried to add a lot of different, resources or materials or ways that you can go about it and achieve the same thing, maybe a little bit differently, so that it appeals to a lot of different people. But the most important thing is just be consistent with your learning, enjoy it, because if you don't, what's the point of doing it, to be honest? It's an awesome language. It's really cool to learn a language, and if you don't enjoy it, then it's pretty much a waste. So that's where I'm going to stop off. Maybe if I have an actual person who wants to do this with me, we can do this, and we can put this on YouTube, and you can kind of see how I talk to a person and try to figure out what is it that they enjoy. How do they want to incorporate their own hobbies and their own, what they do for entertainment with the language learning, so that it's something that's enjoyable and it's entertaining, and at the same time, you're achieving what you want to do. So that's it for this video, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.